Our last speaker for the break will be Travis Walbeck again.
Hi there, I'm Travis. This little bit here is an update on the AASHTO comp technical section.
5b, which is for bridge pavement preservation. It's a group that's relatively new. How many here are familiar with the SOM, section on materials, right? So that's now turned into the Committee on Materials and Pavements. So they've kind of combined the two groups because there was a group of folks that were meeting together on pavements, and they pushed that together with the materials folks and created the same meeting here. So this is one of the sections that's kind of born out of that combination. And there's this whole big long description of what it's supposed to be there. But really what it comes down to us is this committee is there to develop and maintain technical specs on materials and the construction and maintenance of transportation facilities, including highways, bridges, and structures, right? And we call it COM. It's our loving name for it. So there's a whole list of technical sections in there that go through aggregates, they go through emulsions, they go through cement, and then there's a section for metal stuff, for guardrail and pipes. A lot of the preservation stuff has lived in the asphalt emulsion section.
That's where it's lived over the majority of the time, but now we've created this new section there for bridge and pavement preservation. And I'm lucky enough to serve as the vice chair on that committee. Derek Nearplant from Maine is the chair of that group. So, what have we been up to? What have we been doing with this new section? We've been meeting for 2 years now, and we have a whole list of standards. So I think there's about 14 there. You can see they list through all sorts of things. There's some of them are specifically bridge, some of them are bridge and pavement, and but the majority of those are pavement treatments. So microsurfacing, sand seals, slurries, fogs, those types of things are all listed in those standards that we maintain. We also have some new standards that are in process. Right now we have two that have been going through our standard process. One is for diamond grinding, and the other is for the use of a thin bonded overlay that's with a resin binder. So essentially what it is it's like HFST, but not with calcite bauxite, and using different resins and whatnot to try to work that out. Some of that's built through NCPP. I think that some of that came along with things that NCPP have been working on. And there's also these construction guide specs that we're expecting to come out of this NCHRP 1437. We've had submitted that haven't started through the process, but they have been submitted: the emulsified chip seals, the hot asphalt chip seals, microsurfacing, and emulsified asphalt fig seals. But these are construction guide specs that come through there rather than material standards. This last year for our meeting, we had two that needed to be recycled through, and they passed with no problem. I didn't have any comments because they're both like bridge and they were both bridge and things that we just don't use in West Virginia, and didn't know. Then also on this other side here, on what would be your right side, we did a survey looking at the provisional standards that we have out there to say, okay, who's using these standards? Who's using these provisionals? Do we want to keep them? Do we want to retire them? Because if you're not familiar with that process, a standard has, I think it's 7 or 8 years that it can live as a provisional, where it's not a full standard yet. And really we need to make sure that it's working for the people that are using it, and make sure that people are using it. Otherwise, is there really a reason for us to publish an AASHTO standard for that if only one state's using it, right? It should just be a state standard if that's the case. So we took that survey and we found through, again, I think this is about 13 or 14 different provisionals that live within Section 5b there. That's who's using it. Now here's the sad part. So the yellow is who thinks they're going to use it. The red is who has no plans whatsoever to use that standard. So we've got to look at that. I think there's only a couple that are up around 50% of the 14. No, I think it was 16 people that responded to the survey. That there's a couple of them at 50%. So chip seals are up there. Both the design and the material side of chip seals are up relatively high, and both the micros are up relatively high as well. So we're hoping to see that states are incorporating those standards into their specifications, so that we keep doing these, we keep refining these, and finding what's working best for everybody else. So why would a state care? Why would they want to use an AASHTO standard, right? This is something that Larry Thompson and I were talking about this morning. because he and I both work a little bit with the emulsion task force. Why should a state care about an AASHTO standard? I think one of the things that makes it the most attractive is that then your suppliers and your contractors are working to one standard. If they're crossing state lines and they're working with multiple different standards, then it's tough for them to supply the right material. If West Virginia's is different than Kentucky's, then it's tough. But if we're both pointing to an AASHTO standard, it's easy for them to say, well, yeah, that's the same thing because they're using the same AASHTO standard. Let's just push the same thing in that we're using there. It also lets your contractors who are doing the work, if they can work across state lines, I'm sure it would be easier for them to put together a quicker bid, probably more efficient, probably cheaper if they know that they have the same standard from place to place. So those are a couple of the reasons a state would want to use an AASHTO standard there. So we also have a little bit of a problem. So we've been working a lot with the material specs and the design specs, but getting them down on the road, that's a whole different set of guide specs, right? So preservation's moving fast. The materials side, we meet annually, we publish annually. We have this rotating cycle on the way that AASHTO publishes through the materials group. The construction side doesn't have the same type of thing. They do have a construction guide spec manual. I believe the last time it was published was 2008. I think they were talking about 18 or 19, but I haven't seen it yet. Judith, have you seen the new one out yet? I haven't seen it out yet either. So we're looking at a 10-year cycle, and I think those of us that are really involved in preservation know that we're moving faster than that. Things are updating faster than that. We're finding better ways to do things faster than that. So we need to publish faster than that if we're going to put standards out. So they're all changing. Agencies and contractors are innovating. The processes are being consolidated and accepted. I know that over time that the hot in-place recycling industry has had a really wide variance in the process and the trains and what's going on. Those types of things are consolidating so that we can start to publish standards on those types of things. So we need the construction guide specs to catch up with how fast the materials and the design side can be pushed. So I do like this little quote that I got from Colin Franco from Rhode Island that says, people want to use a national standard. I hope that's the case. I hope people do want to use a national standard for this kind of work. So who can help put this all together? That's where the main body of AASHTO kind of came together, and they got to talking and saying, hey, material side folks, they publish often, and the construction side folks know how it needs to go down, and the maintenance folks know when and where it needs to be applied. So let's start bringing those folks together. And essentially what they said is, we're going to go ahead and place the ownership of not only the materials and the design, but also the construction guide specs into this Comp 5b. They publish on a routine basis. They're used to doing that. But we don't want them to do it on their own. What we would like to do is we want to give it to them for 5 years. So for 5 years, let's see how this process works, and let's pull 3 to 5 members from the Committee on Maintenance and 3 to 5 members from the Committee on Construction, and let's put them on that Comp 5b so that they can contribute, they can be involved where it needs to be, how it needs to go down, those types of things, rather than only the materials people dealing with it. And we had pretty good participation from them. We want more. If you're on one of those and you're not involved, this is the right room of people to be involved in that kind of group. So please become involved in that if you can. Your voice will be heard. We will listen to what's going on. The materials folks, I don't think we're pushing the others out in any way. Tracy, did you feel that way? No, Tracy's on it. I don't think she felt at all the materials people were pushing the maintenance side folks out. We want to include everybody's perspective on what's going on there. As we started getting standards submitted, we found they all looked very different. Some people put it together just like the construction guide manual. Some people put it together like a materials standard. We started seeing all sorts of different things, and that in itself is a problem. How are we going to review a standard if it comes in different all the time? So there in our committee in 5B, we decided to come up with a special task force, and the group was charged with exploring the layout and the formatting of preservation construction guide specs to develop a standard, blah, blah, blah. This will allow for a systematic flow for writing, reviewing, and publication of these standards. So let's build a standard for a standard, right? Let's put something together that tells the writer of those construction guide specs what is expected of them. So we put that together. We had 3 webinar meetings. We had a real short fuse on this, which I really liked that it was a short fuse, especially because I ended up being the leader of the group. I wanted a short fuse. If I have a deadline, I can get it done, right? If it doesn't have a deadline, it may linger on for 2 years. So we had a short fuse on this. We ended up with about 14 people at each of those web meetings that we hosted. So we had representatives from, of course, COMP. We also had the Committee on Maintenance, the Committee on Construction. We had about 12 states that were represented in those 14 people per session. And AASHTO Publications and our liaison, Casey, were involved in all of those calls as well to make sure how things kind of flowed through. Here's my trick. I love this trick. So if you've got your cell phone, your smartphone, and are so inclined, please take it out. If you'll open up the camera app and you'll focus it on that QR code up there, your phone will give you an option to open up a website. It will come up through your browser. Now, it's pretty default in Apple. Some of the Androids don't do it. Yeah, Vince over here bragging about his Google phone, because the Google ones certainly do it. So I'll give you guys a minute if you'll connect up to that. All right, I'm done. It's still up there, though. I just moved it on the screen. So we came up with this document through that task force. And in that document, essentially, we have tried to really concisely lay out what the standard is for a construction guide spec, right? So that link, if you'll notice, is that very document that I just displayed right there for you. So you've got access to it on the internet through that QR code. So we went through and we said, okay, these are the documents that we're referencing, and here's our general guidance of how we want it to happen. So, you know, the guidance that we want to use the AASHTO style manual because we don't want to deviate from what publications is. We do want AASHTO stuff to all look very similar. Certainly the construction guide spec for highway construction, that manual that was published in 2008, there are preservation items in there, right? So we want to build on what's there. So that's a reference to us. And then the AASHTO resolution that I was showing you with the red circles that dictated that 5B would be the host of these guide specs is in there. So here's kind of photos of what all of those look like. This brown book, that's that construction guide spec from 2008 there. So if you see that around, that's what's in that book. So some of our other general guidance is that we wanted them all to very clearly state in their title, this is a construction guide spec for chip seal, thin overlay, diamond grinding, whatever it happens to be that it fits there. We wanted to make sure they were active voice and imperative mood. You know, it shall. The contractor shall. Those types of things be in there. And then we listed 5 sections. As we went through and looked at standards, we talked about what our different states used for their standards. We really decided that we needed a description, we needed what the materials are, we needed what the construction process was, we needed to know how it was going to be measured and how it was going to be paid. So through our guide document, we have stated in there that these 5 sections are required, even if you don't have something to put in it, because there is something that there are a few that wouldn't necessarily have exactly that. We still want it in there and to say that it's not used. Again, to make our standard. But if there are things, you know, we certainly would feel like that you could have another one if it just absolutely did not fit into one of those 5 categories. So we came up with essentially a sample document, which further describes how we want that standard to come. And that's part of what I've given you on that upload there was to show you this is how we want the format to look. And it is very much like the standards that are in that original construction guide spec. We didn't want to deviate too far, especially because when we find folks out there that are using those construction guide specs that may not be agency, or may not be state agency folks, if we get local or county agencies, we want it to still look very much the same for them. We do hope they're using these standards as well. So it ends up being 3 pages. So we got that first page and then the 2 pages of the example, and there's a whole bunch of commentary there at the end that says that, you know, don't use tables you can't read, and, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, if there's regional adjustments, let's do regional adjustments. So It's tough to carry that QR code with you, right? So what if you wanted to find this back at your office? Well, this is where Vince has taught me to go, right? Vince is our Google guy at our office here. So we go to Google, that's where we find it. And if you just type in AASHTO comp, at least on my computer, it comes up, AASHTO Subcommittee on Materials, right there on the top, right? So we'll want to select that. And that takes us to this beautiful web page that they've created. And if you look over there on the left side, there's a spot that says Guide Documents, which this is. It's a guide document. So we click on that guide document, and then there at the very bottom, you'll see where we have the Task Force 18.1. That's the little task force that we had out of 5B to come up with that guide document. And there's both a Word and a PDF version of that 3-page document listed there. So this is actually the website where I pointed that QR code that I gave you there. We need you to submit a spec, right? If you've got a process out there that you're working on, whoever you are, find a state agency person that can help carry this forward. Find somebody that can help bring this in. If we need to update a standard, please submit an update to us. Let us talk about it. Let's vet it through that comp group, and let's make sure that we have these standards updated so that we can put the best thing out there for folks to use, and we hope that they do use it. So how do you submit a standard? Well, that's listed in the document, right? Right there at the very bottom, that's listed how you would submit a document across the bottom. So, they will be reviewed through that comp subcommittee. So essentially what you need to do is you need to get a hold of the chairperson, the vice chairperson, or the AASHTO liaison. And there's a couple email addresses listed there. There they are again, so that they're in the document all together. Derek is the default. I serve as his vice chair, and that's it. Any questions?
From the day of submission to the day of the change, how long do you anticipate the submittal process to take?
I think that you're going to look at about 2 years from the time that you submit that. You need to go through a couple different meetings there. So there needs to be the technical section, and then there needs to be the main body that votes on it. And so in order to do that without a special ballot, I think you look at almost 2 years time frame in order to do that, which is still faster than the 10 or 11 years that come out through the other book.
I got a question, comment, I don't know. On that survey, I think we answered, probably, or will do maybe one day. I think maybe, from my perspective, our chip seal spec is 100 years old. It's been in our spec book for as long as we've had a spec book. Expect states to tomorrow switch to AASHTOs. Maybe not the greatest thing, but I think we can all bring them within, compliance with each other. So maybe you have no votes that will adopt it eventually. So I don't know.
Sure. And really, when we look at those that were in there, none of those were construction guide specs, because that's our provisional standards that we already have existing. So those were either material standards or design standards. So I guess I anticipate that it should be relatively simple for an agency to say that our aggregate will meet AASHTO such and such, which is the chip seal materials there, right? I know we just changed ours, I guess it's been almost 2 years ago. We just major overhaul. We would look back, I think Vince and I found the exact same text from the 60s in our chip seal spec before we changed it 2 years ago. But then there's also the design method. So, so microsurfacing or slurry surfacing, if you want to look at what the design is in there, or the scrub, maybe you can just put that in instead of listing all the tests that you expect your designers to put together for a design. You could reference our design shall meet AASHTO such and such. So we hope that's the way people will use them. Okay, thank you.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.